As the last part of the wedding rehearsal concluded, the grand ballroom of the Street Regis, filled with champagne-colored roses, still exuded a sweet, almost suffocating fragrance. Claire emerged from the main hall, her steps light, the sharp click of her heels echoing on the marble floor. She remembered her phone was still in the dressing room and turned back to get it. The entire corridor was silent except for the low hum of the central air conditioning and the faint sound of laughter from the distant banquet hall. The door to the dressing room was slightly ajar. Just as her hand touched the doorknob, a voice from inside spilled over her like a bucket of ice water. "Landon, I know this is what has to be done. I'll be strong, it just hurts. Knowing I have to share you, even for a little while." That was Tiffany's voice, whimpering and soft, like an injured little rabbit. Claire's hand froze in midair. "What are you crying for?" Landon's voice was laced with amusement, careless, as if he were coaxing a petulant child. "How many times have I told you? Marrying Claire is just a temporary thing. The old man is holding that 5% of the family trust's voting power over my head. I can't get my hands on it unless I marry her. Once business is taken care of, the position of Mrs. Ashworth will be yours sooner or later." A wave of low laughter erupted in the room. It was the sound of Landon's childhood friends. Someone jeered, "Landon, you're something else. Get a free marriage and snag billions in voting rights at the same time." Of course, Landon's tone was breezy, as if discussing a minor business deal. "Save your congratulations for when Tiffany and I get married. That will be the real wedding." Tiffany lowered her voice, a coquettish whine at the end of her words. "Landon, isn't this a little too cruel to Claire?" "Cruel?" Landon scoffed. "She should be grateful. Being married into the Ashworth family for a year or two is something she can brag about for the rest of her life." The whole room was laughing. No one thought there was anything wrong with this. Claire's hand slowly slid off the doorknob. She didn't push the door open. A sharp ringing suddenly exploded in her ears, as if someone had set off a string of firecrackers inside her head. Then, a violent spasm seized her stomach. A wave of nausea surged from the pit of her stomach, rushing straight to her throat. She instinctively covered her mouth, her fingertips icy cold. In the dim hallway light, her face was as white as a sheet of paper. She looked down. The 6-carat diamond on her ring finger was quietly refracting the light. The day Landon proposed, he had knelt on one knee and said, "Claire, for the rest of my life, I'm yours." At that moment, she had been moved to tears, believing she was the happiest woman in the world. Now, thinking back, that ring was nothing more than a branding iron. She had been marked as Landon Ashworth's temporary tool, and she had foolishly mistaken it for love. Claire dug her nails into her palm. The pain jolted her back from the dizzy spell. She lifted her head. The full-length mirror at the end of the corridor reflected her entire figure. The carefully chosen blush-pink gown, the special hairstyle for tomorrow's wedding, and the heirloom Ashworth family diamond Riviere necklace passed down from Landon's mother. Every single thing was mocking her. She stood there, motionless, her breath shallow and light, like a sculpture suddenly frozen in time. The laughter from inside the room continued. Tiffany started crying again. Landon was consoling her again. His friends were cheering him on again. These sounds were like a blunt knife, sawing away at her nerves, one cut at a time. But Claire didn't cry. Her eyes were dry and sore, as if her tears had been instantly evaporated within their sockets. In their place was a bone-deep chill, seeping out from her very marrow. 3 seconds. She gave herself only 3 seconds. Then, she turned. Her high heels made a single, crisp sound on the marble floor, and she walked away without looking back. The corridor was long as the self-deception she had lived in for the past 2 years. When Claire walked out of the hotel's main entrance, a fierce night wind swept in, making the hem of her gown whip around her. She stood on the steps and took a deep breath. The cold air cut through her lungs like a razor blade. Then, she raised her hand and slowly, deliberately, twisted the 6-carat diamond ring off her ring finger. Without hesitation, she clutched the ring in her hand, her fingertips turning white from the pressure. Then she opened her handbag and tossed it inside, as if throwing away a used napkin. A taxi arrived 5 minutes later. She got into the back seat and gave the address of their marital home, a penthouse on Park Avenue. The car's heater was on full blast, but her hands and feet were as cold as if they'd been pulled from an icebox. She leaned against the seat, staring at the rapidly receding city lights outside the window. Her mind was operating with a clarity she had never experienced before. Landon's words were like thorns stuck in her brain. Marrying her is just a temporary thing. Temporary. What a fine word, temporary. She closed her eyes, a faint, bitter smile playing on her lips. The memories flashed before her eyes like a slideshow. For Landon, she had resigned from a key position at one of the world's top 3 art institutions to manage his private social calendar and family banquets full-time. For 3 consecutive years, she had helped Ashworth Holdings plan their art investment portfolio, earning them more money than her entire salary combined. She had woken up in the middle of the night to cook broth for his chronic stomach issues, leaving warm medicine on his bedside table. She had done every single thing willingly, because she thought that man loved her. Disgusting. So damn disgusting. The taxi stopped downstairs from the penthouse. Claire walked into the elevator and swiped her card to enter. The entire apartment was decorated with elegant white floral arrangements, and tasteful. Congratulations banners. In the living room were the custom monogrammed items for the next day, the To a Lifetime of Happiness ornaments, and the fresh flowers she had personally selected. Everything was meticulously perfect, like an elaborate joke. She stood in the entryway, staring at the festive decorations for a long time. Then she threw her bag on the sofa and walked straight into the walk-in closet. The left side of the closet, an entire wall, was filled with things Landon had given her over time. Hermes Birkin bags, Bulgari high jewelry necklaces, Chanel limited edition suits, an entire wall of high heels, each pair costing 6 figures. A whole wall piled high with his so-called love. Claire looked at them, one by one. Her gaze was cold and calm, as if she were in a museum, examining a collection of expired products. Then, she took out her phone, found the contact labeled Robert, Esquire, and pressed dial. Sadu 2:80 a.m. Robert, it's Claire. Miss Hayes, at this hour? Draft a statement of dissolution of the engagement for me. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, without a trace of a tremor. I'm waiving all claims to prenuptial asset division. I don't want a single penny from him. The sooner, the better. I want to see the final draft before 8 a.m. tomorrow. There was a 3-second silence on the other end of the line. Miss Hayes. Isn't tomorrow your wedding? There is no wedding. She hung up. Then she walked to the bedroom and dragged out an old, worn suitcase from under the bed. It was the one she had used since graduating from her master's program. The corners were frayed, and the zipper was a bit stiff, but it was truly hers. She began to pack, quickly and precisely. She only took her own clothes, her own documents, her passport, and a few external hard drives. They contained every curatorial proposal, all her industry contacts, and core data she had ever worked on. These were her real assets. As for the things Landon had given her, she didn't touch a single one. She took the Birkin bags, the necklaces, the haute couture gowns, and the designer shoes off the shelves, one by one, and laid them neatly on the floor in the center of the walk-in closet. She arranged them neatly, like a display in a department store. Finally, she took the 6-carat diamond ring out of her bag and placed it on top of the pile. Done. She stood up, looking at the heap of trash worth millions of dollars, and a slight curve appeared on her lips. It wasn't a smile, it was the ultimate expression of scorn. These things were the props Landon used to decorate a temporary marriage. She didn't want any of them. Her phone buzzed, a message from Landon. Claire, Tiffany isn't feeling well. I'm taking her to the hospital. Don't be late for the wedding tomorrow. Get some rest. Claire stared at the message for 5 seconds. Not feeling well? She suddenly felt her stomach churn. The nausea surged back, 10 times stronger than it had been in the hallway. She rushed to the bathroom, hunched over the toilet, and dry-heaved for half a minute. Nothing came out but the bitter taste of bile burning her throat. She knelt on the cold tile floor, forehead resting on her arm, gasping for breath. The tears finally fell, uncontrollably, not out of sadness, out of disgust, out of humiliation. Out of the realization that her 2 years of sincere love had been treated as a joke. She cried for about 2 minutes. Then, she wiped her face forcefully, stood up, and walked to the sink. In the mirror, her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, a complete mess. She looked at her reflection, took a deep breath. Enough. This was the last tear she would ever shed for Landon Ashworth. She picked up her phone. Her fingers trembled, but with extreme determination, she found Landon's name in her contacts, long pressed, and blocked him. Then Tiffany, blocked. Then every member of the Ashworth family, one by one. Then WhatsApp, Instagram, X, every social media account that could reveal her whereabouts, all deleted. Finally, she picked up her suitcase, put on her own old coat, turned off the lights, and walked out of the penthouse filled with wedding decorations. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, it was like the end of a ritual. 3:40 a.m. She checked into a business hotel near the airport. The suitcase leaned against the wall. She sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees. The room was silent, so silent she could hear her own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat reminded her. You are alive. You are free. You never have to be someone's temporary ever again. She pulled the external hard drive from her bag and connected it to her laptop. The light from the screen illuminated her pale face. She began to organize all the curatorial resources, collector contacts, and collaboration data she had accumulated over the years. These were Claire Hayes's weapons, not Landon's diamond ring, not an Hermes bag, not the title of Mrs. Ashworth. It was herself. She worked until 5 a.m. When drowsiness finally hit, she fell onto the pillow and closed her eyes. Tomorrow. No, today. Today was her scheduled wedding day. The thought flickered through her mind, and her lips twitched, but it quickly settled into calmness. Let them wait. Let them wait until the flowers withered. Let them wait until the city's reporters aimed their cameras at an empty bridal suite. Let them wait until that arrogant look on Landon Ashworth's face finally cracked. She closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. It was the soundest sleep she'd had in 2 years. The next day, in the city's most exclusive 5-star hotel, the third-floor ballroom had been transformed into a floral palace. 100,000 imported white roses cascaded from the ceiling, and crystal chandeliers refracted a brilliant light. The guest list was a who's who of the city's elite. Titans of business and politics, top collectors from the art world, heads of financial institutions, each one more prominent than the last. A long line formed at the guest book, and reporters in the media section stood ready with their long focus lenses. This was the grandest high society wedding of the first half of the year. The union of the Ashworth and Hayes families was seen by the outside world as a merger of the century between two old money dynasties. 10 a.m., 30 minutes until the ceremony. In the groom's dressing room, Landon Ashworth stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the cufflinks on his custom-tailored suit. The man in the mirror was young, handsome, and full of confidence, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. His executive assistant knocked and entered. Mr. Ashworth, about the bridal suite. Landon didn't look up, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The assistant hesitated. The bride. Hasn't arrived yet. Landon's hand paused. He then raised an indifferent eyebrow. Wasn't she supposed to be here at 9:30 for makeup? Probably stuck in traffic. Give her a call. We did. The assistant's voice tightened. Her phone's off. Landon finally turned around, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. Off? Yes. Miss Hayes's phone has been off since 7 a.m. this morning. Landon frowned. He subconsciously picked up his own phone, opened his messages, and found his chat with Claire. The last message was the one he sent last night. Don't be late for the wedding tomorrow. Get some rest. No reply. He tried to call her. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. A cold, mechanical voice. Landon's frown deepened, but he quickly suppressed the flicker of unease, letting out a cold laugh. Go tell her I'm not putting up with her tantrums. The sponsorship for this year's National Art Gala and the collaboration with the Hayes family, she can forget about all of it. The assistant opened his mouth, about to say something but stopped. What are you still standing here for? Go find her. The assistant turned and hurried out. 10:15 a.m. The bridal suite was still empty. The makeup artist, hairstylist, and bridesmaids were all there. Only the bride's chair was vacant. The custom Vera Wang gown hanging on its rack drooped its train quietly, as if waiting for someone who would never come. 10:25 a.m. The guests began to stir. People whispered to each other, frequently checking their watches. 10:30 a.m. The assistant, his face pale as a ghost, pushed open the door to the groom's dressing room. Landon was leaning back on the sofa, legs crossed, a smug expression on his face that said, "She'll calm down after her little fit." But when he saw what was in his assistant's hands, his expression froze. The assistant wasn't holding a phone or a message from Claire. He was holding 2 documents. The first was a unilateral declaration of the dissolution of the engagement, stamped with a law firm's official seal and signed by Claire herself. The wording was cold and resolute. I, Claire Hayes, voluntarily relinquish all property rights under the engagement with Mr. Landon Ashworth. As of this day, there are no further legal ties between us. The second was a series of security camera screenshots from the penthouse lobby. The timestamp showed 2:40 a.m., Claire, pulling a suitcase, walking out of the building alone. Landon shot up from the sofa, the two documents trembling slightly in his hand. What about her things? His voice was suddenly hoarse. All gone, the assistant said, his head bowed. In the walk-in closet, all her personal belongings are gone. She only left behind the things you gave her. They're all neatly arranged on the floor. Landon's pupils contracted violently. She left everything he gave her, didn't want a single thing, as if throwing away trash. Impossible, Landon clenched the statement, the paper crinkling with a harsh sound. She wouldn't dare. The door was suddenly thrown open. Tiffany, in a pink dress, ran in, her face a mask of perfectly crafted worry and panic. Landon, everyone outside is asking why the bride hasn't come out. What's going on? Seeing Landon's ashen face, she hurried over and grabbed his arm, her voice small and soft. Landon, is Claire mad at me? I never meant to compete with her. I just love you too much. That's why I couldn't help crying last night. Did she hear something? Landon didn't speak. He stared intently at the legal document, the veins in his temples throbbing. She was really gone. Just like that. No questions, no arguments, no giving him any chance to explain. As swift and clean as cutting off a piece of dead flesh. His heart inexplicably skipped a beat. That's not pain, Landon told himself. That's not pain. It's the panic of losing control, the annoyance of a disrupted plan, the fury of being played by a woman he had never taken seriously. Find her, he gritted his teeth. Use every connection I have. Find Claire Hayes. But it was too late. 10:45 a.m. 15 minutes past the scheduled start of the ceremony. The 300 distinguished guests in the ballroom had moved from whispers to open discussion. Some were beginning to leave. The reporters in the media area, like sharks smelling blood, were frantically snapping photos of the empty floral arch. The Ashworth wedding. The bride ran away. I heard the Hayes girl sent a legal notice. What a massive loss of face. The news spread like wildfire. The head of Ashworth's PR department, drenched in sweat, rushed into the dressing room. Mr. Ashworth, the reporters outside are in a frenzy. Your father. Before he could finish, the door was slammed open. Mr. Ashworth Sr., Landon's father and the true head of the Ashworth Group, stood in the doorway, his face ashen. His eyes blazed with undisguised, torrential fury. The veins in his temples bulged as he pointed a trembling finger at Landon's nose, his voice a roar. What did you do? Landon opened his mouth. The Hayes family just called me, Mr. Ashworth's voice trembled, a mixture of rage and terror. Claire broke off the engagement herself, and her family didn't stop her. Do you have any idea what that means? The collaboration agreements, the trust clauses. All our leverage is gone. He slammed his hand on the table. A teacup vibrated, fell to the floor, and shattered. 300 guests, a live media broadcast. The whole world is watching the Ashworth family become a laughingstock. You tell me, Landon, how exactly did you manage to drive her away? Tiffany cowered in a corner, her face pale, not daring to make a sound. Landon stood there, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. He couldn't say it. He couldn't tell his father what he had said to his friends last night. But he knew in his heart, Claire must have heard. That's why she was so absolute, without a single word of confrontation. I'll handle this. His voice was so hoarse it was almost a whisper. Handle it? Mr. Ashworth sneered, clutching his chest as a sharp pain shot through it. His body swayed. You'd better handle it. Otherwise, you can bear the consequences of not getting those trust voting rights yourself. He turned and left, followed by a panicked retinue of assistants and a medical team. In the ballroom, most of the guests had left. Under the empty floral arch, 100,000 white roses were slowly wilting under the lights. This was supposed to be Claire Hayes' wedding, but she was already gone. That evening, Landon drove back to the penthouse. He didn't know what he was expecting. Maybe for Claire to suddenly walk out of the bedroom, her eyes red, and demand an explanation. Then he would say a few nice things and smooth it all over. Maybe she was waiting in the living room, ready to throw a few glasses, have a good cry, and wait for him to comfort her. He had even rehearsed his lines on the way. Those words last night. I was drunk, just joking with the guys. Don't take it seriously. He pushed the door open. The festive decorations were still there. The custom monograms, untouched. The lifetime of happiness ornaments stood silently on the cabinet. The flowers had started to wilt. The living room was empty. The bedroom was empty. The balcony was empty. He strode into the walk-in closet and stopped. The shelves on the right side of the closet were completely bare. The places that once held all of Claire's personal clothes now held only naked, slightly swaying hangers. And on the floor, on the left side of the closet, was a dense arrangement of items. Hermès Birkin bags, Bulgari high jewelry necklaces, Chanel limited edition jackets, Jimmy Choo heels. Each item was placed with perfect neatness, like a display in a store window. On the very top, resting on the clasp of a black handbag, was the 6-carat diamond ring. It glinted coldly in the light. Landon stood there, staring at the pile, motionless. He used to think these things were his gifts to Claire, his charity. Every time he gave her a bag or a necklace, she would hug him happily and say, "Thank you, Landon." He thought it was a form of alms, a lubricant to make the tool run more smoothly. Now, these things were neatly arranged on the floor, like a pile of garbage, as if she were telling him, "Your so-called charity is worthless." An unprecedented feeling of suffocation washed over him. Landon couldn't name the feeling. It wasn't heartbreak. He told himself it was definitely not heartbreak. It was the shame of having it thrown back in his face. The panic of the prey suddenly breaking its chains. The rage of his prized control suddenly failing. He spun around, grabbed an antique vase from the living room table, and hurled it against the wall. Crash! Shards flew everywhere. "Claire Hayes!" His roar echoed in the empty room, forehead veins bulging, his eyes bloodshot. "You think you can run?" He smashed another vase, and another. The floor was covered in broken porcelain. He gasped for air, his hands braced on the edge of the table, his body trembling like a caged animal. His phone rang. It was Tiffany. "Landon, are you okay? I'm so worried about you. Should I come over? Please don't be alone." Landon stared at Tiffany's name on the screen. Suddenly, the letters seemed unbearably jarring. If it weren't for Tiffany's crying in the dressing room last night, if it weren't for him saying those things in front of everyone, he cut off the thought as soon as it appeared. It wasn't his fault. It was Claire who was too petty. To overreact to a few words like that was simply unreasonable. "I'm fine," his voice was raspy. "I'll find her. She can't escape." He opened his phone, dialed his private investigator, then made several more calls to people who could pull strings. Airlines, hotel systems, bank records. He wanted to track Claire's movements through every possible channel. But the replies that came back were more chilling than the last. "Mr. Ashworth, Miss Hayes's phone number has been cancelled. Not just off, completely disconnected. Her social media accounts are all wiped clean and deleted. Instagram, X, Pinterest, all gone. The bank confirmed that last night, at dawn, she transferred all funds from her personal accounts into an offshore account. We can't trace the specific destination. There are no records of her leaving the country from the airport. No train records either. Either she used someone else's identity, or she never left the city at all. She's just completely disappeared." Every message was like a slap across Landon's face. This wasn't an impulse. This was premeditated. No, she had. In the instant she heard those words, completed a total separation with stunning calm and speed. Cancelled her phone, deleted her accounts, transferred her assets, cleared out her personal items, sent a legal notice. The entire process took less than 6 hours. She didn't even give him a single phone call, a single message, a single chance to question her. She just vanished from his world, cleanly and completely, as if she had never existed. Landon slowly sank to the floor. The shards of broken porcelain dug into his legs, but he felt no pain. He leaned against the wall, head thrown back, staring at the ceiling. The inexplicable void in his chest grew larger and larger, as if something had been ripped out of him, leaving a bloody, gaping hole that was steadily leaking cold air. The fallout from the wedding fiasco was more disastrous than Landon could have imagined. The next morning, his phone was blowing up. Not with news about Claire, but with urgent reports from various departments of the corporation. "Mr. Ashworth, Ashworth Holdings dropped 4 points at the morning bell. Mr. Ashworth, our partners are calling about the wedding. How should we respond? Mr. Ashworth, regarding the joint development agreement with the Hayes family, Mr. Hayes Sr. said they need to reevaluate." Landon gripped his phone, sitting in the living room full of broken porcelain. His eyes, sleepless all night, were webbed with red veins. His head felt like it had been repeatedly smashed by a 1,000-pound hammer, his temples throbbing with a dull ache. But what truly sent a chill down his spine was the message he received at 10 a.m. from the corporate secretary. "Mr. Ashworth, the chairman has called an emergency board meeting for 3 p.m. this afternoon. Agenda item, Asset Restructuring and Accountability Assessment following the collapse of the Ashworth-Hayes Union. Accountability Assessment. The words were a knife at his throat. Landon closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew his father wouldn't let him off. Yesterday, at the wedding venue, the old man had nearly had a heart attack and been carried away. He had never seen such anger and disappointment in his eyes. But he still refused to admit he was wrong. Claire was the one who was wrong. She was too extreme, canceling a wedding over a few words, not even throwing a tantrum, not even giving him a chance. He stood up, glass shards digging into the sole of his foot. He didn't notice. He walked barefoot to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. The man in the mirror was haggard, his eye sockets deep, jawline tight, lips cracked and dry. The phone rang again. Tiffany. Landon, have you had breakfast? I made some porridge. I can bring it over, okay? He didn't reply. 3 p.m. Ashworth Holdings headquarters, top floor conference room. The long table was flanked by board members. The old foxes, their hair gray, all had grim expressions. They looked at Landon as if he were a prodigal son who had made a colossal mistake. Mr. Ashworth Sr. sat at the head of the table, his complexion ashen, but his gaze as sharp as a hawk's. On the table before him lay a stack of documents, the top one, a chart showing the stock's downward trend. Since the news of the wedding cancellation broke, Ashworth Holdings had lost over 11% of its value in 3 days. Nearly $2 billion of market capitalization had evaporated. Explain. Mr. Ashworth's voice was hoarse and cold. What happened? Landon sat in his chair, his back ramrod straight. His eyes glanced at the documents, his stomach churning. Claire, she. I don't want to hear her name. Mr. Ashworth slammed the table, the teacup rattling. I'm asking you what you did to make the Hayes' daughter run away without taking a single penny. Do you think she's someone who needs money? Does the Hayes family need your damn charity? The conference room was silent. All eyes were on Landon. His lips moved, but no words came out. He couldn't admit in front of the board that he had said those things the night before the wedding. That would be admitting to everyone that he, Landon Ashworth, had treated this union as a scam from the very beginning. The direct consequences of the failed union, an old director on the left pushed up his glasses and began to speak slowly, are, firstly, the Hayes family has already frozen the joint real estate development project with us, a deal worth $470 million. Secondly, the terms of the family trust explicitly state that a successful marriage is a prerequisite for unlocking that 5% controlling stake. The wedding didn't happen, so that 5% will never be yours. Thirdly, he paused, glancing at Landon. Market confidence has collapsed. An 11% drop in 3 days. If there's no good news within a week, institutional investors will start a mass exodus. Landon's hands clenched into fists under the table, his knuckles white. And one last thing, another director added, his tone dripping with undisguised mockery. The entire network of resources that Claire Hayes built for our art investment division is now completely severed. Those relationships with top collectors and global galleries were maintained through her personal connections. With her gone, that entire division is paralyzed. Every word was like a blunt knife, slowly carving away at Landon's dignity. He finally snapped. She just did some administrative work. It's not as... Shut up! Mr. Ashworth Sr. closed his eyes, his voice squeezed through his teeth. From today, the Asia-Pacific New Energy Project is handed over to your uncle. Your executive powers as CEO are temporarily frozen. You are not to approve any expenditure over $500,000. When you've stabilized this mess, we'll talk about restoring your authority. Landon's pupils contracted violently. Frozen authority? This was tantamount to kicking him out of the company's power core. Dad. Meeting adjourned. Mr. Ashworth Sr. stood up, one hand pressed to his chest, and walked out of the conference room with heavy steps. No one gave Landon a second look. The well-suited old foxes filed out, some even with a faint, cold smile on their lips. Landon sat alone in the empty conference room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sun was sinking into the city skyline. The twilight glow illuminated his face, but his eyes were a dead gray. He reached out a trembling hand and opened his phone's photo gallery. He scrolled for a long time, until he found a picture. It was from 6 months ago. Claire was cooking noodles for him at home. She was wearing a large white t-shirt, her hair casually tied in a ponytail. She had turned to smile at the camera, a warm smile, her eyes curved like crescent moons in spring. He stared at the photo for a long time, then locked the screen. That night, for the first time, he discovered how empty the penthouse was. Not physically empty, but an oppressive silence that permeated every corner. When Claire was here, the apartment had sounds. The whistle of the kettle in the kitchen, the click-clack of her keyboard in the study, the sound of her humming in the bedroom after a shower, wrapped in a towel, the sound of her voice calling, "Landon, dinner's ready." Now, there was nothing. He opened the refrigerator. It was empty. It used to be always full. Claire would make a grocery list every week for the housekeeper to buy, ensuring his chronic stomach issues wouldn't flare up from an irregular diet. Now, there were only 2 bottles of mineral water and a carton of yogurt 3 days past its expiration date. He closed the refrigerator door, feeling a familiar ache in his stomach. His phone rang, a video call from Tiffany. He answered. On the screen, Tiffany had just showered, her long, wet hair draped over her shoulders. She was wearing a pink slip dress, tear stains still visible at the corner of her eyes. "Landon, you're home alone, right? Should I come over? I can cook for you." "What can you make?" Landon leaned back on the sofa, tiredly rubbing his temples. Tiffany blinked. "I can learn. Whatever you want to eat, I'll make it. My stomach hurts. Just a simple bowl of porridge." "Okay. Wait for me. I'll be there in half an hour." 40 minutes later, Tiffany appeared at the apartment door in a flurry. She rolled up her sleeves and dove into the kitchen, a clatter of pots and pans ensuing. Landon sat in the living room, listening to the various sounds from the kitchen, opening the wrong cabinet, spilling the seasoning, asking where the rice was. An hour later, Tiffany walked out with a bowl. Landon looked down. The porridge in the bowl was thick as paste, a blackish, burnt color, with an unidentifiable layer floating on top. A burnt smell wafted up, making him wrinkle his nose. "Landon," Tiffany bit her lip, her eyes red and pitiful. "I really tried my best. I don't know how Claire used to make this stuff look so easy every day. I thought making porridge was just putting rice in a pot." Landon stared at the burnt, black porridge, his mind filled with images of Claire. The porridge she made was always the perfect consistency, the rice grains soft and creamy, with a few red dates and goji berries floating on top. Every time she brought it to him, there would be a glass of warm water and 2 stomach pills beside it. She would say, "Drink the water and take your medicine first. Let the porridge cool a bit before you eat." Those images were as clear as if they had happened yesterday. His heart contracted violently. Not heartbreak, he told himself. Not heartbreak. Just the discomfort of a broken routine. "That's enough." He turned his face away. "I've lost my appetite." Tiffany froze for a moment, and tears immediately welled up. "Landon, are you disgusted with me? I know I'm not as capable as Claire, but I really love you. Don't cry." "I can't help it. You're being so cold, it scares me." I said, "Don't cry." Landon shot up, his roar echoing through the living room, which fell into a dead silence. Tiffany flinched, tears still on her face, not daring to speak or move. He stood there, panting, then turned away and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Go home," his voice was low. "I want to be alone." Tiffany bit her lip and stood there for a moment, then finally mumbled a soft okay and left with her bag, her eyes red. The moment the door closed, the apartment returned to its deathly silence. Landon sat back down on the sofa, staring at the bowl of burnt porridge on the coffee table. Suddenly, his stomach hurt even more. It hurt so much that he doubled over. In the days that followed, Landon's life visibly crumbled. Without Claire managing everything, his world was like a precision machine that had a core component yanked out, throwing errors everywhere. First, it was work. During her time at Ashworth Holdings, Claire not only managed resources for the art investment division but also handled a significant amount of Landon's private business and social engagements. Which partner's wife was having a birthday, and what gift to send? Which government official preferred what kind of tea? How to arrange the VIP seating at the annual gala? All these tedious but crucial details were managed flawlessly by her. Now, all these tasks fell to Tiffany. The result was a complete disaster. In the first week, Tiffany, while replying to the wife of a key partner on Landon's behalf, misspelled her name. Not just a minor mix-up, she got the last name completely wrong. The woman called to complain, her tone dripping with disdain. "Has Mr. Ashworth's wife been replaced? The new one doesn't seem to do her homework." Landon had to personally call and apologize, his face burning with humiliation. In the second week, there was the board wives' diplomatic tea. This was a monthly informal gathering for the wives of Ashworth's top executives. On the surface, it was tea and chat. In reality, it was a discreet venue for information exchange between the major families. Claire used to handle these events with grace, navigating all the social intricacies and subtly gathering useful business intelligence for Landon. Tiffany went, dressed in head-to-toe designer brands, her makeup flawless. But the moment she opened her mouth, her ignorance was exposed. She couldn't tell who was whose wife, which families had feuds, what topics were taboo. More fatally, she said in front of everyone, Landon's been under so much pressure lately, all because that Claire ran off. The next day, that sentence had spread through the entire circle. Landon Ashworth's new woman openly badmouthed the ex-fiancé at a wives' gathering. How dare she show her face with that kind of class? What kind of family is the Ashworths to find someone like this? The gossip snowballed. Ashworth's PR department worked overtime until midnight every day, trying to suppress one rumor only for another to pop up. The stock price, after a brief recovery, began a new round of decline. In his office, Landon looked at the screenshots in the PR report, the vein in his temple throbbing. For the first time, he lost his temper with Tiffany. I sent you to that tea party to network, not to make us a laughingstock. What is going on in that head of yours? Tiffany's tears flowed like an open faucet. Landon, I really didn't know. Their relationships are so complicated. How did Claire remember all of that? I'm not her. I can't do what she did. She had a file, Landon said through gritted teeth. A relationship map for every family, a profile for every person's likes and dislikes. It was all in her file. That file, he stopped. That file was on Claire's computer. She took it with her. Of course she took it. It was hers. It was the fruit of her years of accumulated knowledge. Landon leaned back heavily in his office chair, tilted his head back, and closed his eyes. That name, a tightening noose around his throat. Claire, Claire, Claire. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time something went wrong at work, he would think, if she were still here, this never would have happened. Every time he returned to the empty penthouse, he would think, if she were still here, the house wouldn't be this lifeless. This longing made him anxious, furious. It led to a near-manic impulse during his sleepless nights. He wanted to find her. Not because he loved her. He told himself it wasn't love. It was because he needed her. His life, his career, his world couldn't function without her to maintain it. She wasn't his wife. She was his tool. He had grown accustomed to this tool's existence. Now that the tool had suddenly disappeared, he realized just how dependent he was on it. And the infuriating part was, he couldn't even find where this tool was. In the third week, Landon finally broke. Sitting in his office, he opened his messaging app. Claire's chat was still there. Even though she had deleted her account, the history remained. He scrolled through the old messages, from the most recent one backwards. Landon, the broth is in the pot. I'm heading out for a meeting, remember to eat. Landon, Mrs. Wright's birthday dinner is on Saturday. I've prepared a gift for you. It's in the entryway cabinet. Landon, are you working late again? Come home soon. Landon, I miss you. One by one, they were as gentle as a flowing stream. He used to never reply to these messages, finding them annoying, clingy, and unimportant. Now, he stared at those 3 words, I miss you, and his chest felt as if it were being squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain making it hard to breathe. His fingers trembled as he typed a line, Claire, if you come back, we can have the wedding again. I'll agree to any condition. Please, just meet me once. Send. A red exclamation mark. The message was rejected. The recipient's account was deleted. He sent another. Red exclamation mark. And another. Red exclamation mark. Each red exclamation mark was like a slap across his most vulnerable spot. Landon slammed his phone on the desk, his hands braced on the edge, panting heavily. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead, his knuckles white. He suddenly realized a terrifying fact. From the beginning, from the night of the rehearsal to now, a full 3 weeks, Claire had not given him a single word of response. No questions, no accusations, no tears, no, how could you do this to me? Nothing. She had vanished as if into thin air. Completely, utterly, without a single lingering attachment. This dead silence was more maddening than any scream or cry. If she had come back and made a scene, he would have had a chance to explain. It would at least prove she cared. But she didn't care anymore. She didn't care about anything. The gentle, considerate Claire who used to send him I miss you every day seemed to have never existed. Meanwhile, Tiffany's troubles were escalating. She wasn't stupid. At least not as stupid as she appeared. She was well aware of her current situation. With Claire gone, she was the target of everyone's scorn. Everyone was secretly calling her the homewrecker who had made it. Even the Ashworth's house staff looked at her with undisguised contempt. But her confidence came from Landon. As long as Landon needed her, she felt invincible. But lately, Landon had become increasingly cold. Before, even though he said marrying Claire was temporary, he had been incredibly tender to Tiffany in private. He sent her flowers, gifts, took her out, and defended her in front of everyone. But after the wedding fiasco, he was like a different person. He didn't answer her calls, didn't reply to her messages. When they did meet, he was irritable and would lash out at her. Tiffany's anxiety was growing rapidly. That afternoon, she saw a limited edition haute couture gown in a department store. It was the required attire for the upcoming Global Art Gala. Only the partners of invited guests were eligible to wear that brand. She instinctively wanted to buy it, using Landon's supplementary credit card. But just as she swiped the card, a woman next to her sneered. "Well, if it isn't the Ashworth's new." The woman deliberately dragged out the word, looking Tiffany up and down. The mistress has made it to the big leagues. Doesn't even consider her own status, trying to wear this brand. Tiffany's face went white. "What did you say?" "What did I say? You know perfectly well," the woman scoffed. "The whole city knows how you got here. A woman with Claire Hayes's background and breeding was forced out by you, and you still have the gall to show your face in public?" Tiffany's hands started to shake. She hated it when people compared her to Claire, hated those condescending looks. She bit her lip, forced herself to complete the transaction, and left with the dress, head held high. But the fallout was far worse than she imagined. That night, the woman posted about the incident on her private social media, visible only to their elite circle. "Saw quite a show at Bergdorf's today. A certain mistress openly using the money of the man whose fiancé she drove away to buy haute couture. Isn't she afraid of getting struck by lightning? Some people are just so shameless." The post was accompanied by a picture of Tiffany's side profile. The next day, the message became a forwarded screenshot, spreading through the entire high society network. The Ashworth Group's PR department had another meltdown. When Mr. Ashworth Sr. saw the news in his hospital room, the numbers on his heart monitor jumped. His blood pressure had been fluctuating wildly for the past 3 weeks. A stent surgery was already scheduled. The doctor had repeatedly warned him not to get agitated, but Landon, that rebellious son, was stabbing him in the heart every day. "Get Landon here," he told the nurse. Half an hour later, Landon walked into the hospital room. Mr. Ashworth Sr. was propped up in bed, his face sallow, but his eyes still as sharp as an eagle's. He looked at his son haggard, gaunt, eye sockets sunken, a stubble on his chin, and the anger in his heart surged again. That Tiffany woman, his voice was hoarse and cold. "Get rid of her." Landon stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, lips pressed tight. "If you don't get rid of her, don't even think about me restoring your authority." Mr. Ashworth closed his eyes, taking a breath. "She is the biggest disgrace to the Ashworth name. Dad, Tiffany." She what?" Mr. Ashworth's voice suddenly rose, triggering the wound in his chest. He clutched it and groaned, then continued. "What can she do for you? Help you stabilize the stock? Secure a partnership? Handle those sharks in the business world? Everything Claire did, has she done a single one of them? You son of a bitch, you pushed the entire family to the brink for a useless piece of trash." The monitor started beeping frantically. A nurse rushed in to check the readings, nervously telling Landon, "Sir, you can't agitate the patient anymore." Landon stood there, his lips moving, but ultimately said nothing. He turned and walked out. The moment he stepped out of the room, the bright white light of the hallway stung his eyes. He leaned against the wall, head thrown back, his Adam's apple bobbing. His father's words were like nails being hammered into him. Everything Claire did, has she done a single one of them? That sentence was more brutal than any reprimand, because it was the truth. For the first time, Landon was forced to confront a fact he had been avoiding. Claire was never just a temporary wife or a disposable tool to him. She was the glue that held all the cracks in his life together. She was the source of his security, the one who always had his back, no matter how much of a mess he made. And he had lost her. No, not lost. He had pushed her away with his own hands. That night, Landon returned to the penthouse and did 2 things. First, he called a top-tier international private investigation agency and tripled the budget for the search. "I don't care what methods you use. Find Claire Hayes's location within a month." Second, he found a silk scarf that Claire had used in the penthouse. It had been hanging on a hook behind the walk-in closet door, somehow missed when she cleared out her things. It still had a faint scent on it. Not some expensive perfume, just the light jasmine fragrance of her everyday laundry detergent. Landon clutched the scarf in his hand and sat in the dark living room. He sat there until dawn. He wouldn't admit he was thinking of her, but his body was more honest than his mind. His stomach ached as if being twisted by a knife. Not from hunger, but because the person who was always there to hand him water and medicine when his stomach hurt was gone. His body was reminding him, in the most primitive way, of what he had lost. The sky outside turned from black to deep blue, then to the pale white of dawn. When the first ray of morning sun shone in, Landon looked down at the thin silk scarf in his hand. It was a light green, as delicate as her name. His throat tightened. His lips moved as if to say something, but in the end, only silence. A long, endless silence. And in another corner of the city, Claire Hayes was rebuilding her world. 3 days after leaving the Ashworths, she rented a small studio in an old, quiet part of the city. It wasn't large, only about 600 square feet, but the light was excellent, with a full-length window overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. She decorated the studio simply and cleanly. On the walls, she hung prints of art she loved. A green plant sat on her desk. The bookshelves were neatly filled with the curation books and global gallery catalogs she had been collecting since her master's studies. This was her territory. No Landon, no Ashworths, no one. Just herself and her profession. For the first few days, she barely rested. During the day, she reconnected with old contacts, organized her resources, and updated her portfolio. At night, she worked on proposals until dawn. She didn't allow herself to stop. Because if she stopped, the images would flood back Landon's mocking laugh, Tiffany's whimpering, the chorus of laughter from his friends. Those sounds were like venomous snakes, coiling around her nerves. Every time they surfaced, they were accompanied by a wave of intense nausea. But she didn't cry. She had shed her last tears in those 2 minutes that morning. That was the last grace she would allow herself. From then on, she would not shed a single tear for Landon Ashworth. In its place was an extreme, almost obsessive focus. She was like a rebooted precision instrument. All her energy poured into her work. She began to reactivate her core network in the industry. The world's top collectors, curators, gallery owners, relationships that had gradually faded because of her marriage into the Ashworth family, she now reconnected with them, one by one. To her surprise, the response rate was remarkably high. Almost everyone welcomed her return. A few veteran European gallery owners even said directly, "Claire, we always thought you shouldn't be wasting your time on a small-time operation like the Ashworth's art division. You have your own stage." She looked at those messages, a slight smile on her lips. Yes, she had her own stage. She always had. It was just that, for the past 2 years, she had folded up her own light, carefully tucking it into the shell of Mrs. Ashworth. For a man who didn't love her, she had personally buried the best years of her career. Thinking of this, the familiar nausea rose again. She took a deep breath and pushed it down. No more thinking about it. The old Claire was dead. Died outside that dressing room door. The one who was alive now was only responsible for moving forward. On the 18th day after leaving the Ashworths, she received a phone call. The number had an international area code. The caller ID showed a name she had saved in her contacts but had never contacted, the direct line for the Asia Pacific office of Sterling Global Capital. Sterling Global. A name that made everyone in the industry speak in hushed tones, not just any investment firm. Behind it stood the most mysterious and powerful family capital in the entire financial world. Rumor had it that the person in charge never appeared in public. His style so low-key it was almost secretive. But every move he made was industry-changing. Claire answered the phone. The caller was the executive director of Sterling's Asia-Pacific office, his tone extremely polite. "Miss Hayes, we've been following your recent activities. Regarding our upcoming Asia-Pacific flagship exhibition, Sterling would like to have a face-to-face meeting with you. Would that be convenient?" Claire gripped the phone, her fingers tightening slightly. The Asia-Pacific flagship exhibition, that was Sterling's core strategic project for the year. The investment was rumored to be over $3 billion. The goal was to create the largest integrated art and commercial real estate platform in the Asia-Pacific region. If this project succeeded, it would completely reshape the entire industry. And they had found her. Yes, her voice was steady, without any excess emotion. "Please give me a time and address." After hanging up, she sat in her studio, looking at the dappled shadows of the plane trees outside her window. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting flecks of gold on her desk. She looked down at her bare ring finger. There used to be a faint indentation on that finger, left by the 6-carat diamond ring she had worn for 2 years. Now, the mark was beginning to fade. Soon, it would disappear completely. Like that relationship. Like that person. Completely disappeared. She curved her lips, closed her laptop, and stood up to pick out an outfit for the meeting tomorrow. The second act of Claire Hayes' life was officially beginning. Landon's 4th week began with a resounding slap in the face. Not a physical slap, but at the board meeting, his uncle, in front of everyone, threw a project evaluation report in front of him. Look at this. Landon's uncle, the vice chairman of Ashworth Group, in his 50s with graying hair but sharp as a tack, spoke with the harshness of an old-school businessman. The preliminary bid for the Asia-Pacific New Energy Project. We lost. Do you know who we lost to? Landon glanced at the report cover. His pupils shrank. Sterling Global Capital. That's right, Sterling, his uncle sneered, leaning back in his chair. And do you know why we lost? Because their business proposal included a whole cultural IP integration plan. That was the highest-weighted section for bonus points. Our art division, ever since your ex-fiancé left, hasn't been able to produce a single decent proposal. The replacements you found don't know the first thing about it. Again, Claire. Her shadow was everywhere. Landon clenched his fists, silent. After the meeting, he sat alone in his office and opened Sterling's bid proposal. He had someone get him a redacted version. He flipped to page 37. His gaze froze. In the bottom corner, in small print. Project Chief Advisor. C. H. 3 letters. Claire Hayes' initials. His hands started to tremble. She hadn't just disappeared. She had gone to Sterling, to Ashworth's biggest competitor. Landon slammed the file on the desk, stood up, and paced back and forth, breathing rapidly. His head was buzzing. A series of terrible thoughts followed one another. When did she get in touch with Sterling? Before or after the wedding? Was this premeditated or a spontaneous move? Was she doing this on purpose? No, he forced himself to calm down. Based on the timeline, she must have contacted Sterling after she left, but this speed, in less than a month, she had become the chief advisor for Sterling's core project. What did that mean? It meant her value in the industry was far greater than he had ever imagined. It meant that the administrative work he had looked down on was actually a scarce resource that the entire industry was fighting for. It meant that he had been completely wrong about her from the beginning. He thought she was just an accessory to his life, but she herself was a goldmine. And he had personally pushed this goldmine to his rival. That night, Landon sat in his car and had the driver circle the places Claire used to frequent. The independent bookstore she loved, the tree-lined lane she enjoyed, the private kitchen he used to take her to. He went to all of them. Of course, he didn't see her. She no longer appeared in these places. Or rather, she no longer needed to appear in places tied to her past. Finally, the car stopped under a streetlight. Landon took out his phone and stared at Claire's contact name for a long time. The number was disconnected, but he had never deleted it. He opened his notes app and typed, letter by letter. Where are you? Why won't you give me a chance to explain? Even just to yell at me once. After typing, he stared at the words for a long time, then selected all and deleted. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat, leaned his head back against the headrest, and closed his eyes. The city lights flickered across his face, like a collapsing universe. At the same time, Tiffany's situation was rapidly deteriorating. After the department store incident, she became a complete joke in the high society wives' circle. No one wanted to associate with her. Those shrewd ladies knew that being seen with a woman of questionable status would damage their own reputations. Tiffany's invitations for lunch went unanswered. Group chats went silent whenever she spoke. Even the sales associates who used to be polite to her were now subtly sarcastic. She grew more and more anxious, and anxiety led to more mistakes. One day, to prove she was worthy of Landon, she used his supplementary card behind his back to buy a jade jewelry set worth $80,000 from a high-end jeweler. She thought that by dressing herself up, she could shut everyone up. The look on Landon's face when he saw the bill was something Tiffany would never forget. Not anger. A cold, dead gray weariness. Return it, he said, just 2 words. Landon. I said, return it. Tiffany bit her lip, tears welling up. You won't even let me spend a little money now? Claire used to spend much more than this. You never said a word to her. Every penny she spent, she could earn back tenfold. What about you? That sentence was like a bucket of ice water poured over her head. Tiffany's mouth fell open, her face ashen. You're comparing me to her? Her voice began to tremble. Landon, you said you didn't love her. You said you loved me. You said you would marry me after you got control of the trust. Enough. Landon stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked towards the door. His voice was as cold as a winter rail. I'm not in the mood to argue about this right now. The door slammed shut in front of Tiffany. She stood alone in the vast living room, tears finally streaming down her face. She looked at the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Landon. It was once her most prized possession, a symbol that she was more dazzling than anything Claire had. But now, she suddenly felt that the bracelet was feather light, like a straw that could break at any moment. She was scared, more scared than ever before. She was afraid Landon no longer needed her, and she was even more afraid that the person he needed was never her to begin with. Claire's first time meeting Ethan Sterling was in the top-floor conference room of Sterling Global's Asia-Pacific headquarters. It was a space so minimalist it was almost cold. No extraneous decorations, just an entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows and a long black table. On the table lay her proposal for the Asia-Pacific flagship exhibition, a thick stack, each page representing the sleepless nights of the past half-month. She wore a navy blue sheath dress, her hair in a low bun, her makeup elegant but not overpowering. She stood in front of the projector, presenting the core logic of her proposal to a room full of executives. The Asia-Pacific art market is undergoing a structural upgrade. The traditional gallery model has hit its ceiling. What we need is a new experiential asset framework that shifts art from a collectible to a consumer good, while maintaining its financial leverage. Her voice was clear and confident, her data precise to 2 decimal places, her logic tight and seamless. The executives, accustomed to having their time wasted by mediocre proposals, all sat up a little straighter, but her gaze never once landed on the man at the head of the long table. Ethan Sterling, 34 years old, the man in control of Sterling Global Capital, the name spoken with reverence and awe in financial circles. He sat at the farthest end, almost melting into the shadows. A dark gray shirt, buttoned to the top, sleeves rolled to his wrists, revealing a watch so understated it was almost unidentifiable as a luxury brand. His features were sharp, his cheekbones like carved marble. His eyes, in the cool white light of the conference room, were a translucent amber. He had been watching Claire from the moment she walked in. His gaze never left her. It wasn't an uncomfortable scrutiny, but a controlled, discerning observation. Like looking at a rare collectible that had suddenly appeared in his field of vision. Calm, focused, with a barely perceptible, sharp interest. Claire finished her presentation. The room was silent for 3 seconds, then a few scattered claps. The executives began to whisper among themselves, some already flipping through the proposal details, their faces showing unconcealed approval. The executive director at the door breathed a sigh of relief, about to announce the end of the meeting. A voice came from the head of the table. Sty. 2 quiet words. The voice was deep, with a natural magnetic quality. Not loud, but with a penetrating power that was impossible to ignore. Everyone fell silent. Ethan rose from the shadows. He was tall, over 6 feet, and the act of standing created an effortless sense of authority. He walked to the other end of the long table, where Claire was. His pace was unhurried, the sound of his leather shoes on the floor rhythmic and measured. Everyone filed out of the room. The door was gently closed. The massive conference room was left with only 2 people. Claire stood her ground, looking up slightly at the man who had stopped in front of her. Her face was calm, but her back was straight. She knew the weight of the man before her. Ethan stopped about a meter away. He glanced down at the proposal documents scattered on the table, then looked up, his gaze landing on her face. The proposal is good, he said. His tone was devoid of polite platitudes, only a precise, almost formulaic evaluation. Better than I expected. Thank you, Claire nodded slightly. Ethan didn't reply. His gaze lingered on her face for 2 seconds. He noticed the faint, dark circles under her eyes and the slightly pale color of her lips. Then he turned, walked to a side cabinet, and opened a climate-controlled compartment. Inside wasn't wine or coffee, but a cup of warm oat milk. He placed the oat milk on the table in front of Claire. Your body fat percentage is low. Your complexion isn't good. His tone was extremely matter-of-fact, as if stating a financial data point. High-intensity work requires basic energy supply. Drink this before you leave. Claire looked down at the cup of oat milk and froze for a second. She couldn't remember the last time someone had paid attention to her physical state. In the 2 years with Landon, he had never noticed if she had eaten, or if she looked pale. In his eyes, she was always full of energy, always on standby. And this man, a complete stranger, had noticed after just one look. Her throat tightened. She reached out and took the cup. The warmth of the ceramic spread to her palm, almost too hot. "Thank you," she said again. This time her voice was lower, the ending slightly tight. Ethan took a half step back, hands in his pockets. "Miss Hayes." "Yes?" "Sterling's $3 billion Asia-Pacific project is yours, starting today." He paused, his gaze meeting hers directly, his voice low and firm. "You've earned more than just respect." Claire held the warm cup, her fingers tightening slightly. She looked at the man in front of her. There was no condescending charity, no high and mighty pity, and certainly no implication that a woman can't do this. He was simply acknowledging her abilities on equal footing and directly translating that trust into actual power. $3 billion. A scale she had never touched at Ashworth Holdings. Not because she couldn't, but because Landon never gave her the chance. In Landon's eyes, she was only fit for support roles, for running errands when he couldn't be bothered. And Ethan Sterling had handed her the entire stage. Claire's heart skipped a beat. Not the flutter of a crush, but something deeper, more complex. Like a door that had been locked for a long time was suddenly pushed open, and the tremor she felt as the light poured in. "I'll do it well," she said, her voice steady, her eyes bright. Ethan looked at the light that had suddenly ignited in her eyes, his thin lips curving ever so slightly. Not a smile, just a faint, almost imperceptible softness. Like a warm current moving beneath a deep sea of ice. "I know," he said. Over the next 2 months, Claire threw herself completely into the preparation for Sterling's Asia-Pacific flagship exhibition. She led a small elite team, building the entire project framework from scratch. Venue design, collection selection, collector invitations, brand partnerships, media strategy. She was hands-on with every detail. The workload was insane. She was sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a night. But her condition was visibly improving. Not the rush of someone running on adrenaline, but a genuine vitality that came from doing what she loved. Her eyes grew brighter, her complexion better. Though still slim, her voice now carried something it never had before: confidence. A confidence that didn't come from any man, any social label, but from her own abilities. Ethan was busy. As the head of Sterling, his schedule was timed to the minute. But every few days, he would appear at the exhibition's preparation site, not as an investor coming to inspect. He never interfered with Claire's professional decisions. His appearances were always incredibly low-key. Sometimes, after she had been working for 6 hours straight, a hot meal and a glass of warm milk would suddenly appear on her desk. She would look up, and Ethan would be standing at the office door, holding another file, as if he were just passing by. "Eat before you continue," he would say, and then leave. Sometimes, after a long, exhausting negotiation with a partner, she would be sitting on a bench in the hallway, and Ethan would walk out of a nearby conference room. His steps would pause for half a second in front of her. In that half second, his gaze would accurately scan her face and condition. Then he would continue walking, telling his assistant behind him, "Postpone this afternoon's external meeting by an hour. Let Miss Hayes's team rest." Never saying too much. Never crossing a line. Never acting like a benefactor. At first, Claire didn't think much of it. She just thought Ethan was an extremely efficient and rational partner. Every action he took had a clear business logic. Protecting the well-being of key personnel was, in itself, a way to protect the investment. But one time, she changed her mind. It was during the final sprint of the exhibition preparation, late one night. She was working overtime in the studio until 2 a.m. All her colleagues had left. She was alone, adjusting the final lighting plan on her computer. Suddenly, a soft knock on the office door. She looked up. Ethan was standing there. 2 a.m. He was wearing a dark casual jacket over a white shirt, 2 buttons undone. He looked like he had just left a formal dinner early. He was holding a paper bag. "You're still here," he said. Not a question, a statement. As if he had known all along she would be. Claire was a little surprised. "Mr. Sterling? Passing by this late?" "No," he said. He walked in and placed the paper bag on her desk. He opened it. Inside was a container of warm, nourishing lentil soup from that small organic cafe in the West Village she'd once mentioned, and a small, elegant box containing 2 perfect macarons from Latteray. "Your assistant said you skipped dinner." Claire looked at the congee, her nose suddenly stinging. Not because she was moved well, maybe a little, but more from a sense of surreal displacement. She remembered all the porridge, soups, and medicines she used to prepare for Landon every day. No one had ever done this for her. She was always the one taking care of others. And now, someone was passing by her studio at 2 a.m. just to bring her a bowl of congee. Thank you, her voice was a little hoarse. Ethan didn't sit down. He stood by her desk, his gaze falling on the lighting plan on her computer screen. He looked at it for about 10 seconds and said, "The color temperature in Zone 3 could be lowered by half a degree. It's too warm. It will interfere with the cool tones of that art installation." Claire froze for a moment, looked back at the screen, thought for 2 seconds, and then nodded slightly. "You're right." She adjusted the value. A flicker of movement at the corner of Ethan's mouth, so slight it was almost invisible. "Go home early." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, without looking back. "The driver is waiting downstairs to take you home. Don't refuse, it's on the way." The door closed. Claire stared at the door for a long time. Then she looked down, picked up a piece of osmanthus cake, and took a bite. It was sweet. Warmly sweet. She ate one piece after another, until she had finished the entire bowl of congee. On the way home that night, sitting in the car Ethan had arranged, she watched the city's nightscape fly by. The window reflected her own face. It was fuller than it had been 2 months ago. The fatigue was still there in her eyes, but her lips had regained some color. She suddenly remembered the first thing Ethan had said to her, "You've earned more than just respect." At the time, she had thought it was just a polite phrase. Now, she was beginning to think he might have been serious. The opening night of the Asia-Pacific flagship exhibition was set for a weekend that had the entire city buzzing. The moment the news broke, the whole scene exploded. This was Sterling's first public appearance since entering the Asia-Pacific market. The scale of the investment, the caliber of the participating brands, the weight of the invited guests, it was being called the most sensational, cultural, and commercial event in the last 5 years. Admission was by invitation only. Landon spent 3 whole weeks, using every last bit of his remaining connections, just to get one ticket. Not because he was interested in art. He knew very well that the head of Sterling would be there. And to salvage Ashworth's current predicament, he had to connect with the real top-tier resources at that event. Of course, he had another motive. Claire. The private investigator had confirmed her role in the Sterling project. She would be there. She had to be. Thinking of seeing her again, Landon's heart began to race uncontrollably. It was a complex mix of anticipation, fear, anger, and an inexplicable longing. He had lost a significant amount of weight in the past 2 months. His cheekbones were prominent, his jawline sharp as a knife, his eye sockets sunken. He was shrouded in a gray pallor of exhaustion, but he still meticulously chose his attire for the night. A custom-tailored suit, cufflinks, leather shoes, every detail perfect. Tiffany, naturally, was to attend with him. She spent 3 days preparing. A new hairstyle, a new gown this time, not bought with Landon's card, but a knockoff she had paid for herself, and elaborate makeup. She twirled in front of the mirror 3 times, smiling cautiously at Landon. "Landon, do I look good?" Landon glanced at her, his expression blank. "Let's go." The gala was held at a newly completed modern art center in the heart of the city. The entire building's facade was projected with flowing light art installations, looking like a glowing jewel floating in the city's heart. A 50-meter red carpet stretched from the entrance, flanked by a media pit crowded with reporters, flashbulbs popping incessantly. The guests were all rich and powerful. Financial titans, cultural leaders, key figures from politics and business, and the heads of major families with their glamorous partners. Landon entered the venue with Tiffany. His eyes had been searching from the moment he walked in, scanning every corner, every face, every passing figure. Nothing. He hadn't seen her. His heart sank a little, but he forced himself to stay calm. He picked up a glass of champagne and began to mingle, but everyone looked at him with a certain polite distance. The ripples of the wedding fiasco were still spreading. None of these shrewd old foxes were willing to get close to the Ashworths, while their ship was taking on water. Tiffany clung to his arm, her smile stiff. She could feel the stares directed at her, scrutinizing, contemptuous, mocking. But she held her head high, telling herself, "I am Landon Ashworth's woman. I have the right to be here." At 9 p.m., the lights in the hall suddenly dimmed. Only a single spotlight at the entrance remained, like a beam of light from heaven. Everyone's gaze gathered there. The noise gradually subsided, replaced by a low hum of excitement. Whispers rippled out from the entrance. "She's here. Look. Who is that? My God, that dress." Landon turned his head. In the column of light, a woman was walking in slowly. She was wearing a vintage black haute couture gown. The dress seemed to have been poured onto her body, with a cinched waist and an A-line skirt, revealing her delicate collarbones and shoulder blades. The fabric shimmered with a low, flowing light. Her hair was pulled back into an elegant low chignon, secured with a single silver hairpin. No other jewelry. She didn't need any. She herself was the most dazzling presence in the room. Cool, noble, composed, like a newly unsheathed sword. The moment Landon saw her face, the blood rushed from his head. His brain short-circuited for half a second, then all his senses exploded. Tinnitus, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, tingling fingertips. The champagne in his hand sloshed, a drop landing on his cuff. He didn't notice. His entire attention was captivated by that woman. It was Claire. But not entirely the Claire from his memory. The Claire in his memory was always soft, her smile warm, her tone gentle. Her style was tasteful, but never ostentatious. She always stood half a step behind him, a quiet background. But the woman standing in the spotlight now radiated an aura he had never seen before. It wasn't deliberate flamboyance. It was an undeniable, powerful presence from within. The kind of crushing confidence that only a person who truly controlled their own destiny could possess. She was a little thinner, but her spirit was completely different. Her eyes were bright, her posture relaxed, her steps steady. She was no longer the docile, cautious, almost Mrs. Ashworth. She was Claire Hayes. Just Claire Hayes. The lights in the hall came back on. The host on stage announced the official opening of the exhibition, but no one was listening. All eyes were on Claire. The well-heeled, well-traveled guests murmured their admiration. The women sized up the brand and cut of her dress. The men whispered, asking about her identity. That's the chief curator of Sterling's Asia-Pacific exhibition. Claire Hayes? The one from the Ashworths? No wonder Landon looks like death warmed over. The whispers, wrapped in various gazes, pierced Landon. But he couldn't feel it anymore. He just stood there, staring at Claire's back in the crowd. She was talking to a few top European collectors, her demeanor elegant and composed, smiling occasionally, speaking in a low voice. A circle of people surrounded her, each one's face showing obvious respect and enthusiasm. For a split second, her gaze flickered through a gap in the crowd and met his. Only for a fraction of a second. Then her gaze slid past, without stopping. No surprise, no anger, no emotion whatsoever. As if she had just seen a stranger. Or more accurately, a face not worth wasting any expression on. That dismissal was more brutal than 1,000 cuts. Landon's fingers tightened around his glass, his knuckles white. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. The pain so intense he almost doubled over. Landon, Tiffany's voice came from beside him, laced with anxiety. What's wrong? Who are you looking at? She followed his gaze and found the woman in the black dress in the middle of the crowd. Tiffany's face changed instantly. Jealousy, like a venomous snake, shot up her spine and wrapped around her throat. That dress was clearly a global limited edition haute couture piece. The kind she couldn't afford even with 3 months of her allowance. That aura was something she could never imitate. The people surrounding Claire were each worth more than 10 lifetimes of Tiffany. She gripped Landon's arm, her nails almost digging into the fabric of his suit. Landon, her voice trembled with insecurity. That's Claire. Landon didn't answer. He hadn't even heard what Tiffany said. In his ears, there was only the sound of his own heart. Thumping, thumping, thumping. Each beat telling him a cruel fact. He had lost. He had completely and utterly lost. And the woman he had lost was transforming, at a speed he could never catch up to, into a new, shining existence. She no longer belonged to him. Not a single part of her. Tiffany couldn't stand it anymore. For the first half of the evening, she had been forcing a smile, following Landon around. But her eyes kept darting, every few seconds, to the woman in black at the center of the crowd. Claire was like a perfectly cut black diamond, the focal point wherever she went. The elite guests orbited her, their laughter constant, their faces full of admiration. Tiffany's side, however, was a desolate wasteland. Since entering, no one other than Landon had spoken to her. She had tried to join a conversation with a few wives, but they had glanced at her with polite, cold smiles and turned away to continue their chat. She held her champagne glass, her fingers white-knuckled. Landon had disappeared from her side at some point. She searched the crowd and found him standing by a pillar, his eyes locked on Claire, his face as dark as a stormy sky. Tiffany's heart sank. Then she saw Claire, alone, heading towards the side hall's lounge area. Her back was composed and proud, the rhythm of her heels on the floor unhurried, as if the whole world were under her control. Tiffany bit her lip. A thought swelled in her mind. She had to go over there. She had to let Claire know that she was the one Landon had chosen. She was the victor, the one who had the last laugh. She put down her glass, wiped the sweat from her palms, and hurried towards the lounge. The lounge was a semi-open space, with groups of sofas separated by low planters. Claire was sitting on a white sofa in the innermost section, looking down at her phone, her slender fingers occasionally tapping the screen. Tiffany stopped in front of her. Claire didn't look up. "Claire," Tiffany began, her voice as soft as cotton candy, a watery sheen in her eyes. "It's been a long time." Claire's fingers paused. She looked up, her gaze so flat and devoid of warmth that it was like looking at an irrelevant object blocking her path. "Is there something you need?" Tiffany flinched under that gaze but quickly composed herself, forcing a pitiful smile. She sat down opposite Claire, her hands folded in her lap, leaning forward slightly, the picture of a repentant rabbit. "Claire," she said softly, "I was so happy to see you today. Are you doing well? I've been so worried about you. Ever since you left Landon, he hasn't been doing well at all." Claire said nothing, just raised an eyebrow slightly. Tiffany took the silence as an invitation to continue. "Oh, Claire, it's so brave of you to be here. I just want you to know, I hold no grudges. Landon is just happier now. He needs a certain kind of support, you know? I'm just glad I can finally give that to him, without anything standing in our way." She paused, looking up with a triumphant glint in her eye, scanning Claire's dress and makeup. "Or did you find some rich man to latch onto? Claire, you weren't like this before." Her tone was perfectly modulated, every word feigning concern but laced with poison. She wanted Claire to know she had lost, that no matter how glamorous she looked, the man's heart was not with her. Tiffany finished, tilting her chin up, tears glistening, waiting for Claire's reaction. Anger, maybe. A defense. A loss of composure. She was ready for anything, except for what happened next. Claire put down her phone and slowly looked up. Her gaze swept over Tiffany's face, over the carefully applied makeup that couldn't hide the cheapness underneath, over the flawed stitching on the knockoff dress, over the nervously twisting hands. Then, she reached for the glass of ice water on the coffee table. Before Tiffany could react, a full glass of ice water was splashed in her face. The cold water streamed down from her head, over her nose and lips, into her collar. The 3 hours of makeup were instantly ruined. Mascara ran, foundation blotched, lipstick smeared. "Ah!" Tiffany shrieked, jumping up as if electrocuted. Claire stood up. She was half a head taller than Tiffany, and with her 4-inch heels, she had an almost physical dominance. She looked down at the drenched, pathetic Tiffany, her gaze as cold as a scalpel, without emotion, only the precise judgment of a surgeon. "Tiffany," she began, her voice quiet, but each word carrying immense weight. "Open your damn eyes and see who's hosting this party." Tiffany's body trembled uncontrollably. In my eyes, Claire tilted her head slightly, a faint curve on her lips. It wasn't a smile, but a look of ultimate condescension. "You and the Landon Ashworth you cling to are nothing more than 2 pieces of depreciating garbage assets, ready for liquidation. Get out. 1 word." Tiffany's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the sofa. Her face was transparently pale, her lips trembling, trying to say something, but her throat was choked. Claire's aura was like an iceberg pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Water dripped from Tiffany's chin onto her dress, creating dark stains. Her mascara formed 2 black smudges under her eyes, making her look utterly pathetic. Claire didn't give her a second glance. She picked up her phone from the table and turned to leave. Just then, hurried footsteps approached from the entrance. Landon. He must have heard Tiffany's scream. He burst in, his eyes first landing on the soaked Tiffany on the sofa, then quickly shifting to Claire's back. "Claire!" His voice was hoarse and sharp, filled with the pent-up emotions of the past 2 months. "Don't go too far." Claire's steps paused. She turned to face Landon. It had been 2 months. He was much thinner than she remembered, his eye sockets sunken, his cheekbones prominent. He looked like he had been drained of all life. But his eyes still held that familiar arrogance. Even at his lowest, he refused to bow his head. "Too far?" Claire looked at him, her tone as flat as if discussing the weather. "Are you sure you want to use that word with me?" Landon's chest heaved. His eyes searched her face for any trace of hatred, any lingering affection, any hint of the past he could still grasp. But he found nothing. She looked at him like a stranger. No, more distant than a stranger. A stranger at least incites curiosity. He was a complete blank to her. You think just because you've found some new sugar daddy, you can. He didn't finish. Behind him, the sound of steady footsteps, not rushed, but each step firm and powerful, like a silent declaration. Landon spun around. Ethan Sterling walked in from the lounge entrance. He was followed by 4 bodyguards in black suits, each one tall and expressionless. But more imposing than the bodyguards was Ethan himself. He was still wearing the dark gray shirt, now with a black blazer thrown over it. His stride was relaxed but commanding. His eyes first landed on the crumpled Tiffany on the sofa, his gaze like he was looking at a stain. Then, it settled on Claire. He walked to her side, and in a completely natural motion, his arm went around her waist. The gesture wasn't possessive. It was protective, a silent declaration that she was in his territory, and no one was to touch her. Claire stiffened for a moment but didn't pull away. Ethan's arm was warm and strong, his body heat transferring through the thin fabric of her dress. She could feel his fingers tighten slightly, as if to confirm she was all right. Then, Ethan turned to Landon. He looked down at him, not because of his height, though he was an inch or two taller, but because of that innate, crushing superiority that comes from being at the absolute top of the power hierarchy. Ethan's gaze landed on Landon's face. It was so cold it was absolute. No anger, no contempt. Just a pure, indifferent condescension. Like a creature at the top of the food chain looking down at some insignificant life form. "Mr. Ashworth," he began, his voice low, but every syllable a bullet shot into the air. "Show some respect to my fiancé." Fiancé. The word was a depth charge, exploding in Landon's brain. His pupils contracted violently. He felt as if he had been slapped hard across the face. His eyes darted frantically between Ethan and Claire. He saw Ethan's hand on Claire's waist. He saw Claire's calm, almost placid profile. Fiancé? She was Ethan Sterling's fiancé? Ethan Sterling, the legend of Wall Street, the man his father had to be deferential to, the true kingmaker of the entire financial market. She was with him? You. Landon's lips trembled violently, his voice a strained whisper. That's impossible. Ethan ignored his reaction. His gaze didn't linger on Landon for more than a second. He turned his head slightly and said to Claire, in a voice only they could hear, "Are you okay?" Claire nodded slightly. Ethan turned back to Landon. This time, his voice held something else. Not anger, but a coldness more chilling than anger. "And another thing," he said. "As of tomorrow, all loan facilities for the Ashworth Group from Sterling-affiliated banks will be frozen. Your equity pledge ratio has already hit the margin call line, hasn't it?" He paused, a faint, almost imperceptible curve on his lips. "I'm shorting your company." Landon's legs gave out. He felt his blood run cold. Not a metaphor, a real physical reaction. His limbs were numb, his mind blank. His heart felt like it had been squeezed tight and then suddenly released, the pain almost making him double over. Ethan Sterling was shorting Ashworth Holdings. With Sterling's resources, this wasn't a threat. It was a death sentence. Landon looked at Claire, nestled in Ethan's embrace. He wanted to rush over, grab her hand, yell at her, ask her why she had left so decisively, why she was with his enemy, why she wouldn't even give him the satisfaction of hating him. But his legs were like lead. He couldn't move a single step, because he finally realized. The gap between him and Ethan wasn't something that could be closed with effort. It was the chasm between social classes, the difference between an ant and an elephant. He thought he was at the top of the pyramid, but in front of Ethan, he wasn't even in the middle. And Claire, the Claire he had once seen as a tool, was now standing at the very peak, side by side with a man he could never hope to reach. Tiffany was shivering nearby, completely terrified by the scene. She recognized that face, that aura, that crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe. She opened her mouth to call Landon's name, but no sound came out. Ethan gave Landon one last look, a look of casual pity. Then he turned, his arms securely around Claire's waist, and led her out of the lounge. Their backs disappeared into the light at the end of the corridor. Landon stood alone. His legs finally gave out. He collapsed onto the sofa, his body like a boneless puppet. Cold sweat poured down his forehead, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. Tiffany crept over, her wet hand grabbing his sleeve. "Landon, don't touch me!" He threw her hand off, his voice a hoarse rasp. Tiffany stumbled back, tears welling up again. But Landon had no time for her. He lowered his head, his hands clutching it. The cold sweat dripped onto his expensive trousers, leaving dark spots. His heart felt like it was going to explode. Not because of the short-selling threat, not because of the family crisis. Because of the look she gave him. That complete, utter, emotionless indifference. It was worse than hate. Hate, at least, meant you still cared. She didn't even care enough to care. The next morning, the Ashworth nightmare began. Ethan was a man of his word. At the 9 a.m. market open, 3 Sterling-affiliated commercial banks simultaneously issued notices freezing all of Ashworth Group's credit lines and demanding repayment of short-term financing within 30 days. At the same time, a flood of institutional sell orders for Ashworth stock appeared on the secondary market. Precise, dense, merciless. Like a scalpel cutting into Ashworth's lifeline. The stock price plummeted 9% within half an hour of opening, the drop widening to 14% by the afternoon, triggering a temporary trading halt by day's end. The entire financial world was shaken. The news that Sterling was shorting Ashworth exploded like a nuclear bomb. Everyone knew what it meant. When Sterling entered the game, it wasn't just to play. This was a move to take Ashworth out completely. Landon was trapped in the Ashworth headquarters conference room. He hadn't left since 9 a.m. The table was piled with financial reports, bank demand letters, and legal documents. The phone rang incessantly. Partners, suppliers, the media. Every call was bad news. Mr. Ashworth, ex-bank, is demanding we put up another $20 million in collateral within 3 days. Mr. Ashworth, 3 suppliers have halted shipments. They say they'll resume after payment is confirmed. Mr. Ashworth, our law firm called. If the stock continues to fall, the pledged shares will trigger a forced liquidation. Every message was a knife in his back. Landon sat at the head of the table, his notebook empty. His eye sockets were sunken to their limit, his lips cracked and white. He exuded an aura of deathly decay. At 4 p.m., the fatal blow landed. The CFO pushed open the door, his face gray. Mr. Ashworth, there's a situation? What is it? Sterling's legal department submitted a report to the regulators this afternoon. His voice was tight. Regarding accounting issues in our art investment division, Landon shot up. What accounting issues? Fraudulent valuations and related party transactions. The CFO's forehead was slick with sweat. They claim that over the past 3 years, we have engaged in systematic price manipulation and benefit transfer in art trades. The evidence chain is extremely complete. Landon's breathing stopped. The art investment division. That was the area Claire used to manage. She knew every transaction, every collection's valuation, every capital flow like the back of her hand. If anyone could pinpoint the loopholes, no, not if. It was her. It had to be her. Only she knew about the gray area operations hidden beneath layers of financial reports. Those operations weren't Claire's doing. They were a joint effort by Landon and his uncle. When Claire was in charge, she only handled normal curatorial business. But as a key member of the division, she couldn't have been unaware of the backroom deals. She knew. She had always known. But she had never said a word. Until now. She had handed this knife to Ethan Sterling. Landon slowly leaned back in his chair, head thrown back, staring at the ceiling. The white fluorescent lights made his eyes water. He suddenly laughed. A hoarse, broken laugh, like shattered glass being squeezed from his chest. She was ruthless. 1,000 times more ruthless than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just getting revenge. She was systematically, precisely, like dismantling a machine, taking apart his entire world. That night, in the hospital, Mr. Ashworth Sr. received the notice that regulators were launching an investigation. The old man's blood pressure shot up to 230. The heart monitor blared. The medical team rushed in for an emergency rescue. They saved his life, but half his body was paralyzed. A stroke. Right side hemiplegia. When the news reached Landon, he was sitting in the empty conference room. The table was a mess of documents. Outside the window, the city was lit up. He picked up his phone and saw a message from his uncle. Emergency board meeting vote results. Your position as CEO is officially terminated, effective immediately. Landon stared at the message for a long time. Then he gently placed the phone on the table, stood up, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city's nightscape spread out beneath him, a river of traffic, a sea of neon. Everything was functioning normally, except that, starting today, he was no longer a gear in this giant machine. He had been kicked out, completely kicked out of the family empire he was so proud of. And the starting point of all this was just a single sentence, on a rehearsal night, 2 months ago. Marrying her is just a temporary thing. Huh, temporary. His lips twitched. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. At that moment, he finally admitted it. It wasn't that Claire was extreme. It wasn't that she was petty. It wasn't that she didn't give him a chance. It was that he deserved it. From the very beginning, he never deserved that woman. The rain poured down, a torrential downpour, as if the heavens had upended a lake. Water hammered the ground, splashing up a white mist. Everything beyond sight became a blurry gray. Landon stood in front of Claire's studio building. He didn't know how he found this address. Maybe it was the last clue from the PI. Maybe it was the tree-lined lane she had mentioned once on a sleepless night. In any case, he was here. Drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his trousers stained with mud, his leather shoes full of water, squishing with every step. He had been standing here for 40 minutes. The security guard had tried to stop him once. He didn't leave. The guard tried again. He still didn't leave. Finally, the guard gave up. "Suit yourself," he said, and went back to his post. So he just stood there in the rain, like a broken, abandoned sculpture in a storm. It was all over. Ashworth stock, after a 3-day trading halt, opened at its limit down. The regulatory investigation team had moved into the headquarters, sealing all the computers and files in the finance department. At the emergency board meeting, his uncle had been appointed interim chairman. His first act was to publicly distance the company from Landon, claiming the illegal operations were the former CEO's personal actions, and the company had no knowledge of them. He had been abandoned by his own family. Tiffany was gone too. The day Landon's credit cards were frozen, she packed her bags and left. She didn't even say goodbye, disappeared without a trace. Just like Claire had. How ironic. The people in his life ended up leaving him in the same way. The only difference was, when Claire left, she left behind a floor full of luxury bags, a symbol of her pride and contempt. When Tiffany left, she took everything she could, including the limited edition Patek Philippe from his study drawer. Now he had nothing. No family, no power, no money, no woman. Just the pouring rain, and the light that was still on in Claire's third-floor studio. He looked up at the light, rain pouring into his eyes. He couldn't tell if it was rain or something else. His lips were purple from the cold, his body trembling uncontrollably. But he didn't feel cold. Or rather, the coldness inside him was far more biting than the storm outside. The light went out at 7:13 p.m. His heart suddenly pounded. 5 minutes later, the glass door of the building was pushed open. Claire walked out. She was wearing a beige trench coat, holding a transparent umbrella. Her boots made a crisp sound on the wet steps. She was looking down at her phone, probably replying to a work message. The moment Landon saw her, all the strength seemed to drain from his body. His knees buckled, and he fell, thud, into a puddle. The splash of water hit his face, icy cold. He knelt there, rain pouring down on him, washing away the last of his dignity. Claire heard the sound and looked up. She saw him. A man kneeling in the rain, less than 10 feet away. His suit was soaked and muddy, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face pale as paper, his lips a purplish gray. But his eyes were red, bloodshot red, as if he had been crying or running a fever for days, filled with a crazed light. Claire stopped. She stood on the steps, the umbrella over her head. Rain streamed down the transparent surface, forming an invisible barrier between them. She didn't speak. Landon spoke first. "Claire." His voice was so hoarse it was almost inaudible. His Adam's apple bobbed violently. "Claire." He knelt in the puddle, his hands on the muddy ground, his fingertips white from the cold. He looked up at the woman on the steps, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "I was wrong," he said. "I was really wrong." His voice trembled, a tremor that came from the depths of his soul. It wasn't an act. In that moment, all of Landon's arrogance, his self-importance, his condescension, had shattered into dust and been washed away by the rain. "Tiffany, I made her leave." "No, she left on her own." He choked, gasping for air. "Claire, from the day you left, everything went wrong. Everything collapsed. I've been thinking, for 2 months, not eating, not sleeping. And I realized, you were never temporary to me. You never were." He pushed himself forward on his knees, the rough ground scraping them. He reached out a trembling hand, trying to touch the hem of her trench coat. "Please, come back. We can start over. The wedding. I'll do it again. I'll agree to any condition. I'll give you anything you want. Just come back. I can't live without you. The last 5 words seemed to take all his strength. After saying them, he slumped over, his back hunched, rain pouring down his neck. He didn't even have the strength to shiver. Claire stood on the steps, looking at him for a long time. Her expression never changed. No anger, no pity, no contempt, not even satisfaction. Just calm. As if looking at a closed case, a past that no longer had anything to do with her. Then, she moved. She slowly walked down the steps. 1, 2, 3. The umbrella still over her head, she walked right up to him, so close he could have reached out and touched her. Claire knelt down. She half knelt on one knee in front of him. The posture didn't make her look subservient. On the contrary, even at this height, her back was straight, her gaze steady. She was like a judge, leaning in to hear the defendant's final statement. She raised her hand, her slender fingers lightly brushing his muddy face. The gesture was so gentle that Landon's body trembled violently. For a second, he thought he had won, that she had softened, that the story could go back to the way it was. But her next words crushed all his illusions. Landon Ashworth, she said his full name, her voice soft, so soft it was almost lost in the rain, but every word was crystal clear. You were pretty impressive that night in the dressing room, weren't you? Talking about how marrying me was just temporary. Landon's breathing stopped. Claire's hand withdrew from his face. Her fingertips were stained with a little mud. She looked down at her hand, then slowly, deliberately, took a tissue from her trench coat pocket and wiped them clean. The action was elegantly cruel. Thank you for that warning that night, she said, standing up again, looking down at the man kneeling in the mud. It allowed me to successfully liquidate my position at Ashworth's Peak. She gave him one last look, a look without hate and without love, only a profound, unshakable indifference. As you are now, you don't even have the right to kneel at the sole of my couture shoes. She turned away. The umbrella spun, flinging drops of water. Her steps were steady and resolute, one after another on the wet ground, the splashes of water reflecting the streetlights. She didn't look back, not once. Landon knelt in the rain, his mouth open, his eyes fixed on her receding back. He wanted to scream, to chase her, to crawl up and run after her, but his body wouldn't obey, just like his life. Completely out of control. Irretrievably lost. The rain fell harder. Claire's figure disappeared at the end of the tree-lined street. A black Maybach was parked silently at the corner. The headlights came on, a soft glow in the rain. The back door was pushed open from the inside. A hand with well-defined knuckles reached out and steadily took the umbrella from Claire. Ethan Sterling sat in the back seat. His gaze flickered for a moment at the kneeling figure in the distance, then returned, fully, to Claire as she got into the car. Handled? He asked, his voice low, without excess emotion. Claire fastened her seatbelt, leaned back, and let out a soft breath. Yes. Ethan didn't ask any more questions. He reached over and turned up the car's heater by 2 degrees, then picked up a cashmere blanket from the side and quietly draped it over her knees. The car moved smoothly into the rainy night. Tiffany's end came faster than anyone expected. After being cast aside by Landon, or more accurately, after she fled the sinking ship, her situation plummeted. Without Landon's credit card, without the halo of being the almost Mrs. Ashworth, her life was instantly knocked back to its original state. She moved into a cheap, damp, moldy basement apartment, a world away from the 2,000-square-foot master suite she had occupied at the Ashworths. But she was bitter. So incredibly bitter. Why did Claire get to make a comeback? Why did Claire get Ethan Sterling? Why did that woman she looked down on, that housewife who only knew how to cook broth, now stand at a height she could never reach? Jealousy ate away at her sanity. She started calling the tabloids. I have dirt on Claire Hayes, she whispered into the phone. The things she did when she was with the Ashworths, how she snagged Ethan Sterling. You want it? The tabloids, of course, wanted it. But what she didn't know was that 5 minutes after she made that call, a transcript of the conversation was already on the desk of the head of Sterling's legal department. Ethan Sterling's intelligence network was far more extensive and responsive than Tiffany could ever imagine. The afternoon she was supposed to meet the reporter, a team of 6 lawyers arrived at her basement apartment. They didn't bring a warning. They brought a thick stack of evidence about how Tiffany, over the past 2 years, had used Landon's trust to embezzle over $300,000 through fraudulent invoices and forged receipts. About how she had used Landon's name to run up tabs at multiple luxury stores without paying. about her fraudulent activities, accepting brand collaboration fees on social media while posing as Mrs. Ashworth. Every claim was backed by screenshots, audio recordings, and bank statements. The evidence was irrefutable. When Tiffany saw the documents, her face went from white to green, then to a dead gray. You, this is slander. Her voice was shrill. This is all fake. Claire sent you to frame me, didn't she? The lawyer was expressionless. Miss Miller, this material has been submitted to the police. We advise you to cooperate with the investigation. That evening, 2 plainclothes officers appeared at the basement door. When Tiffany was taken away, she was practically limp. She was dragged out, screaming and struggling. Claire Hayes, you bitch! You ruined me! You'll rot in hell! Her voice echoed in the narrow hallway, sharp and piercing, like a cornered animal in its death throes. No one paid her any attention. That night's headline news was about Claire's Asia-Pacific exhibition breaking $10 million in sales in its first week. On the screen, Claire, in a simple white suit, stood at the world's top art auction, her expression composed and confident. Ethan Sterling stood a step behind her, his gaze fixed on her. The elegance and glamour on the TV, contrasted with the disheveled, hysterical woman in the police station, formed the most ironic picture in the world. 3 months later, at the International Art Biennale's closing gala, Claire, for the unprecedented success of the Asia-Pacific exhibition, was nominated for and won the award for the year's Most Influential Curator. It was the industry's highest honor. Past winners were all titans who had been in the field for decades, and she, at 30, became the youngest recipient in the award's history. The ceremony was held in a century-old opera house. The dome was painted with Renaissance frescoes, and the light from the crystal chandeliers fell like a river of stars. The attendees were no longer just city socialites, but the top tier of global culture and capital. Claire stood on the stage. She wore a sleek black gown, with no elaborate decorations, just a simple silver brooch at the collar. Her hair was in its usual low bun, revealing her long neck and a tiny pearl earring. Simple, clean, but under the spotlight, she seemed to glow. Not the light of jewels or brands, but the confident, composed glow of someone who had truly reached the pinnacle of her field. Down in the front row, Ethan sat. He wore a dark, formal suit, his posture relaxed but focused. His gaze hadn't left Claire since she walked on stage. There was a deep, undisguised pride in his eyes. Not the pride of "look at my woman," but the pure acknowledgement of she deserves the best the world has to offer. After the ceremony, they stood on the opera house's rooftop terrace. The night air was cool, the city lights spreading out below like a river of stars. A faint piano melody drifted up from the ballroom, gentle and serene. Claire leaned against the railing, holding the award. The crystal base reflected a pale blue light in the moonlight. Ethan came up behind her. His steps were light, but Claire sensed his approach immediately. She didn't turn, a small smile playing on her lips. He stood behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist from the sides. Not tight, not loose, just enough for her to lean against his chest without feeling constrained. Cold? His chin rested on the top of her head, his voice low, tinged with the coolness of the night air. No. A few seconds of silence. Then, from the inner pocket of his suit, Ethan took out a small, black velvet box. He didn't kneel. There was no grand ceremony. He simply held the box out to her and gently pushed it open with his thumb. Inside was a ring. Not a flashy, pigeon egg-sized diamond. It was a platinum band of the most minimalist design, set with a single, tiny, exquisitely cut blue sapphire. It sparkled quietly like a star. Claire, he said her name. Claire turned to face him, looking up. The moonlight fell on his face, making his amber eyes transparent and gentle. It was a look she had never seen in any man's eyes before. No possession, no charity, no hint of "you need me." Only an equal, sincere, unreserved love. "My world," he said, his voice low, deep, and steady. "Every word, as if it had been weighed 1,000 times. Will always have a place for you." Claire looked at him, at the small ring in his hand. She remembered the rehearsal night a year ago, the 6-carat diamond, those cold words, the chill that seeped into her bones. All of that was far away now, as far away as a previous life. She held out her hand, her left ring finger, the finger that once had a faint indentation, now completely gone. Ethan gently slid the ring onto her finger. The warmth of his fingertips touched hers, lingering for a second. Claire looked down at the quiet blue sapphire sparkling in the moonlight. She smiled. Not a polite, proper smile, but a bright, slightly mischievous smile that came from the bottom of her heart, like the first flower of spring blooming. She took his hand. "Okay," she said. The wind blew past them, lifting the hem of her dress and scattering the last shadows of the past. The city breathed quietly below, and she, finally, stood on her own summit, not because of the man beside her, because of herself.